Let's talk now about posing our characters in ZBrush. Now, we've seen posing used on just a single subtool, but what happens when we have multiple subtools, as is the case with this cave dweller creature? Here we have teeth and a tongue, and we have a floor plane here which I've hidden, which I just used as a guide when I was trying to make sure that the fingertips and toes were sitting on the same plane. Now I can delete that floor plane, I don't need to keep it, but that still leaves us with three separate subtools. Now I want to pose those tools together so they follow and the teeth don't get left behind when I pose my character. Now to do that, we're going to use a plugin under the Z plugin menu, and that plugin is called Transpose Master. Now when you open Transpose Master, it will look like this. What we'll do is we'll click T-Pose Mesh, and what that does is it takes all the subtools and steps them down to their lowest subdivision level, bakes them together, and creates a temporary model here called the T-Pose Mesh. And that T-Pose Mesh has all the subtools in it. Each one has a separate polygroup, and they're all set up so you can pose them together. So let's take a look at how we'll do that now. I'm going to use transpose for my posing. Now what that means is I'm going to come up here and go to rotate, R for rotate, but I'm going to turn off the gizmo, and that gives us this transpose line. Now, when I'm in transpose mode, that is the gizmo is turned off, if I control, click, and drag, I can do what's called transpose masking, which masks based on the underlying topology. So I'm going to begin just by masking the torso, and I'm going to go into draw mode, and I'm going to turn on my X symmetry. I'm just going to do a little bit of masking here, just to extend that mask down. Invert, and then control, click to feather the mask. Now I'm going to go to transpose rotate. I'm going to click here where I want the center of rotation to be, and I'm going to drag out and let go somewhere off the model. Now the reason I do that is if I drag my line like this, it sticks to what's underneath, and I just want to make a clean straight line, so I let go over the background, and that makes a nice straight line. Now I'm going to move this transpose line into the center along where the spine would be. And I'm going to do rotate, R for rotate, and I'm going to click in the outer circle, and that will rotate around this circle. So wherever this circle is, if I click on the circle, I can move it. Click in this circle, and it will rotate based on, oops, missed a little bit of the masking here. I just want to make sure that I get the inner thigh mask there. Let's make sure all this is masked out. There we go. Go to transpose rotate. Click and drag the outer circle, and then we can rotate the body. And again, I need to make sure any stray areas that are not getting a mask have masking on them. So we've got to be careful with that. And let's do that again. Transpose rotate, and then click and drag. There we go. So that rotates the torso up. Now I want to rotate around the axis of the torso, so I'm going to click and drag in the center circle, and that will rotate the torso. Now, this is an interesting thing that we can do. Let's go ahead and control, click, and drag up the waist a little bit more. Let's extend that mask so it's going a little bit further up the waist. Oops. Let's do control, click, and drag. And just make sure we get a nice mask right up to the waist there. Control, click to feather the mask. Go back to rotate. I'm going to draw another transpose line. Move it to the center of the spine, and then I'm going to pull the end out pretty far. Now I'm going to go to rotate. I'm going to hold down the Alt key while I twist to the center circle, and that sort of twists but limits the effect of the twist, so it creates a far more natural kind of rotation here. So that's a nice little trick there. Now notice that our subtools here are masked as well. So before I do that rotation, I need to make sure that I unmask those teeth and tongue. Now, when I click and drag that center circle, they will rotate along with the head. So let's go ahead and let's arch the back a little bit more. Let's grab that circle, bring it back here, and just bring that back up a little bit. And then let's rotate the head. So I'm going to go to transpose rotate, mask down the neck based on the topology, invert that mask. You see the teeth and the tongue are unmasked. I'll draw a transpose line along the neck, and then let's just move it from the top view so it's sitting right down that axis. And then we can rotate that head and rotate it back. There we go. So you see that we're able to very, very effectively pose this character. Let's mask down to this arm here. Let's go in with our brush and just make sure that we manually mask out any areas that didn't quite get enough masking. And let's go ahead and control click to feather the mask and do a transpose line here. And then we can bring that arm out. And then I'll move this end point, go to rotate and click in that center circle, and that'll just rotate that arm out a little bit. Let's do the same thing for the other arm. We'll go to R for rotate, control, click, and drag until we get the topology of that arm masked. Sometimes it can be a little tricky depending on the underlying mesh. We may have to come in and manually unmask areas that we want to deform, like I'm doing here on the shoulder. Go to transpose rotate, draw a line here, and let's rotate this shoulder back. And now I'm going to rotate the elbow. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to draw the transpose line down to the elbow. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and then click and drag inside the center circle, and that does what's called bone posing, where it'll stretch what's on this side and compress what's on this side. So it actually helps give us a nice kind of a skinning deformation there. I want to supinate this arm so the palm is facing a different direction. So I'm going to draw a transpose line down the length of the arm. And I'm going to extend the endpoint out pretty far, go to rotate, hold the Alt key down, and click and drag the centermost circle, and that supinates the bones of the forearm. See that? Now we're going to have to manually fix those fingers because the pose doesn't work anymore for the fingers, but I am going to bend the wrist. So I'm going to draw a transpose line down to the wrist, hold down the Alt key, and then just click and drag to bend that wrist out. All right, so let's clear our mask. And we're going to come down here and let's do some posing on these fingers. So let's control, click, and drag to mask down to each finger and see if we can't fix these up a little bit. So I'm going to begin by Alt, make sure that I don't have extra fingers unmasked here. There we go. Rotate, Alt, click, and drag in the outermost circle. Go up to the next knuckle and Alt, click, and drag that down. And Alt, click, and drag this. The idea is that we just want to sort of get those fingers in a little bit more natural position for where the hands are now. They're no longer splayed out against the ground, so it doesn't make sense for them to be in that pose anymore. Control, click, and drag down to the ring finger, and then just draw another transpose line. And I just Alt, click, and drag in the outermost circle, and just repose those fingers. It's a little unwieldy. It's a little clunky when you first start doing it. I won't lie to you, but it does become quite simple as you become accustomed to the tool. It doesn't behave much like other tools, so it might feel a little bit difficult for you the first time you use it. So there you go. That hand feels a lot better now. I do want to do some adjustments though right there. We'll go to the move brush and just do some adjustments on the hand there. Do a little bit of smoothing. There we go. This looks like he's maybe caught sight of some sunlight up here, and it's very upsetting to him being a cave dweller. Let's fix these fingers on this other hand. Go to transpose and control, click, and drag down to that first finger. Draw a transpose line, and then we will Alt, click, and drag to rotate those joints. Do the same thing for the middle finger. We've got to be really careful that we don't accidentally unmask portions. So there we go. Let's draw that transpose line. Move it inside the knuckle, and then just Alt, click, and drag to rotate that digit down. Alt, click, and drag. Alt, click, and drag to rotate. Extend that joint down to the next knuckle. Alt, click, and drag to rotate that. We'll do the pinky finger now. Make sure that everybody gets a mask. Alt, click, and drag. Make sure that nothing is unmasked. Alt, click, and drag. Bring that joint down. Alt, click, and drag. And there we go. So now we've got a much better pose on that hand. Now, Perhaps I want to adjust one of the legs. I'll do transpose rotate and mask down to the leg, and then manually unmask the hip. We'll go to transpose rotate. We'll draw a line from the hip down to the knee, and we'll just rotate that leg back. And then we'll bring that joint down to the knee. Let's mask down to the knee. Bring the joint down here and hold down the Alt key and then click and drag, and that'll use that bone posing, that sort of stretch and compress algorithm to help make that deform nicer. And I get a little bit of collapsing there I want to fix, so I'm just going to manually take the move brush and tweak this stuff out a little bit. There we go. Let's take the inflate brush and just build up that calf muscle a little bit. And there we go. Now maybe we want to put a little bit of asymmetry into the tail. I will mask the tail up to the base of the spine, invert that mask, and then very, very simply do the same thing with Alt, click, and drag, just scooching this joint down as I go. Alt, click, and drag. And that executes that bone posing that's so very, very effective. Let's mask down to here, draw a transpose line, Alt, click, and drag, just to whip that tail up a little bit. Alt, click, and drag. There we go. Oops, that's too much. Go back here. Alt, click, and drag. There we go. So now we've got our pose. How do we transfer this back to our model with the individual subtools? We go back to Transpose Master and click T-Pose to Sub-T. And that will take the position of each one of those subtools and transfer it over from that base mesh. So here we should see an update. There we go. And unfortunately, we got a little bit of a problem there. Let's come back over here. And it looks like at some point my teeth didn't catch up with my head, my teeth and tongue. So what I will do is I will just mask the body. Very, very simple. Take a transpose line and I'll just scooch these pieces over. That was my mistake, and it happens with some regularity when you get in the groove when you're sculpting or posing. That can happen, but it's easy to fix. I'll just scooch those over, clear the mask, and then T-pose to sub-T, and it will transfer all those positions over, and it should correct those teeth and tongue. There we go. Now if there's any sort of tweaks I want to make, I can come in here and just make sure that everything's still lining up nicely, which it does actually appear to be lining up pretty well to the underlying sculpture for the gums there. So that's all good. Now, that is transpose posing using Transpose Master and the transpose line. Now we do have another option here. We can pose using Z-spheres. Z-spheres can be used as a posing rig, and this is actually quite nice. And we're going to take a look at this now. And in addition to this, we're going to look at the ability to store our pose in layers. Now we can do this even if we're not using Z-spheres. If we turn on this layer option here, it'll take the pose and then add a layer for each subtool and store the pose in the layer. So let's take a look now at Z-sphere rig and layers. I'm going to open up a new file to do this. So here we have our creature once again with the various subtools, and we also have a Z-sphere rig, and this is just a Z-sphere chain that was built based on this character. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Transpose Master. I'm going to turn on Z-sphere rig and I'm going to turn on layers. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select my Z-sphere rig and I'm going to click Store Transpose Master Rig. Now we'll go back to our character and I'm going to click T-Pose Mesh, and this will create a T-Pose mesh like we did before, but this time there will be a Z-sphere in the center. Now I'm going to click Paste Transpose Master Rig, and that rig that I stored from my Z-sphere chain will update and paste inside of this character, as you see here. Now, you could just use that Z-sphere that was loaded up by default to build your rig right here inside of the model. I just found it easier to make one separately because I used a Z-sphere chain to create this model. What's important is that you just have that Z-sphere chain, and each sphere exerts a radius of control over the vertices around it. So you want to make sure that you have spheres enough to carry all the details of like the head or the joints and the fingers, etc. I didn't put joints down the fingers of this character because I just wanted to illustrate sort of a big generalized posing, but of course you could put spheres down through the hands. If you'd like to learn how to create hands with Z-spheres, I encourage you to watch the Z-sphere video that's part of this series. So we've got the Z-sphere chain inside. How do we pose with it? Well, what we do is we come down here to rigging and click bind mesh. Now the mesh is bound to my Z-sphere chain, and I can simply go to rotate, and I will rotate this joint. I can rotate this joint. Notice that my knee has two spheres in it. I find that that's much better for maintaining the volumes of the leg. So we'll bring that foot down a little bit. Let's go ahead and maybe grab this sphere here, and let's rotate. There we go. We can rotate that torso up. Rotate that neck. There we go. Maybe we'll bring one arm out. Bring this arm up. Bring this arm back. And there we go. Let's actually adjust this wrist a little bit. There we go. So here we've created another pose. Now, what I will do is I will come back and click T-pose to sub-T just like we did before, but this time we have layers turned on, so watch what happens. One thing that's nice about this method of posing is you never end up leaving your other subtools behind because they just become part of the rig. You don't have to worry about manually unmasking anything that might have become masked. There we go. So that deformation transfers over. And here we go. So now you see that we've got our pose transferred over from our rigged version of the character. If we go to the layers menu, you see that there is a layer here. If I turn off visibility on that layer, the tongue returns to its original position. If I alt-click on the body to select the body, for example, go to our subtools, make sure the body is selected, go to our layers, turn off visibility on that layer, it returns the body to its original position. So that's quite handy. Being able to have layers in which each portion of your pose is stored means that you can always return to a neutral position, that you don't have to have that pose intact. You can always get back to the original model position, which is very, very nice. It's a handy thing to have. And again, that can be used even if you don't have Z-sphere rig turned on. Layer can be used even if you're just doing transpose posing. So that is Transpose Master and posing in ZBrush. Hopefully you found this useful and you can see ways that you can incorporate this into your own workflow. I used to not use Z-sphere rigs myself. I was aware of the process because I had to teach them, but over the last year or so I've started really utilizing them more and more. I think it's a really effective way of posing. It just takes, I think, a little bit more time because you need to go in there and create your rig, but it can be really nice for posing hands and doing complex compositions between multiple characters. So I encourage you to explore those options if you can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.